All right, so this recording that you're listening to right now is very classic lunch on the way. And what I mean by that is what you're going to listen to is us trying to reach for something we can't quite get a hold of. You might hear a few things that we say that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they said those things about, well, I won't say exactly about what, but this conversation is very much us trying to reach and articulate something that is incredibly difficult to articulate. So, what I want really from the listener right now is to give us a lot of grace and a lot of charity and a lot of understanding because we desperately need it. And any of the conclusions that we come to in this conversation are probably not the conclusions we're going to land with in the long term. It is just us trying to grab a hold of something we can't quite reach. And in order to do that, and in order to think, we have to risk something. We have to risk reputation. We have to risk our own present ideas and understandings. And that is incredibly scary. But I would say if you're not flirting with that line, then you're not really doing deep work and deep thinking and deep reflection, which is what we try and do in this episode. So please enjoy. So yesterday, Graeme came to me and he brought up a talk or a discussion about when is progress and efficiency and getting things done quickly and always progressing towards a goal a hindrance, or when does it actually become how would you say, Graeme? When does it actually become an issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's that relentless sort of push to make things efficient and more effective. And it feels like we're on this treadmill of just relentless sort of push forward, and that sort of got me thinking, and it's made me go looking as a little bit as well. Which you have certain interests in people that you've sort of gone go to. And I attended a conference online. Well, I haven't attended it. I basically got permission to get the videos because I paid to attend, but I wasn't getting up that early in the morning. I'll work my way through those lectures. But this was with Hermot Rosa,
Yeah.
Andrew Root at Princeton.
Well,
And so it's theologians engaging with, he's a kind of philosopher sociologist. His primary discipline is sociology, but he's a philosopher. So he wrote a book, big door stopping book called
okay.
uh,
Wow.
hard to summarize the book because I've only read about a quarter of it. Um,
What's
but
he resonating with?
his whole thing is that we're in this sort of acceleration. Everything's accelerating.
Mhm.
And so in around this, he's got this idea about dynamic stabilization. The culture looks for it as a system, and it's trying to stabilize itself. So this notion is, and what got me interested in that was because of obviously digital media makes it go faster.
Right.
But back to where Joey picked me up is, I mean, this is a little bit of my sort of my own journey a little bit. I'm feeling like I just want to get off the treadmill. I just like it's just like the church has got to grow. We've got to plant more churches. We've got to it's just never good enough, and it's not just there. I mean, it's out in the marketplace too. We got to get the GB,
Gross
the
domestic
gross
product.
domestic product up. We've got to perform better, and you just see people that the people are wilting, and so something, it's that kind of discomfort that I'm feeling that's kind of made me, and then I sort of see that in the whole church system, the whole Christian system, where you kind of just think, do you really want to be part of this? I mean, that sounds horrible. How much of this podcast is going out?
Graeme, well, I'm not
All of
editing
that.
any of this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're gonna
But
qualify it. We're gonna
it
qualify it.
is that sense of this constant need to, and that's where you might want to pick up what I kind of wrote to you is about this within Protestantism or within the church. It's just this thing to grow,
Hmm.
and what's all that about? Is what's going on? underneath in the culture. Yeah, go for it.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode, and don't forget to
like and subscribe on YouTube.
And if you're listening to this on audio, don't forget to follow and rate.
We really appreciate your listening.
Well, Kia ora koutou, welcome to Lunch on the Way. That was a different kind of introduction, but we're here with Graeme and Jonathan, and Graeme is clearly working through something I think all of us have been wrestling with and trying to feel our way towards. And what I want to say, Graeme, is I completely resonate on some level with what you're saying. I can't say all levels, but I can say on some level. Where I think whatever the content of this lecture was is neither here nor there, because I think that there's the myth. I think I've heard of it before like this. There's a myth in Western civilization where
Yeah.
everything's going up and to the right, or where there's perpetual progress
Mm-hmm.
going into this direction of us achieving an ideal state of humanity,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, or an ideal state of living or an ideal world. And I can't divorce that from even, I guess, a Protestant biblical worldview. I think Protestantism has actually created that in a sense. I can't say the Bible has, but I can say a Protestant interpretation of the Bible certainly has, where
Mm-hmm.
there is a story in the Bible that says that we are progressing towards. We're not quite sure what the progression is going to look like, but we are progressing towards a new heavens and a new earth, where at some point Jesus is going to come back, and that seems to be what the end of the story is, in a sense, where God's rule, reign, presence is everywhere, and we find ourselves caught up in Him. But it seems like that idea has been transplanted onto our moment in time where we're trying to move our way into a particular economic progress or medical progress
Mm-hmm.
or life hack or productivity progress. And then the church version of that is growing the church numerically to take ground and change culture progress. And so that's the bit where I'm kind of seeing a lot of parallels with what you're communicating. Um, I don't know. That's just my initial
But
thought.
what was interesting, so
Yeah,
I
it's good.
sat in on this thing that Andrew Root, who's a practical theologian. He writes really good stuff, actually. I've read a bit of Andrew's stuff. We had him here at Laidlaw,
Okay.
and he he was sort of talking a little bit about reflecting on Rose's stuff. And so he was asking the question, and I'll kind of throw this out: is how are we to make sense of growth inside the Protestant decline? How should we make sense of growth, and particularly what will stabilize us in this moment? And so he was sort of thinking about this idea of roses that we're kind of caught in this period of acceleration. It's got to get, in modern culture. And so it's got to grow, we've got to get the economy going more. And of course, in my area of communication, it's every product makes it go faster because of the digital space. And he's saying that actually what's going on there is this desire to stabilize the system. But to stabilize the system, you've got to feed the system with more growth. So it's an endless cycle of faster and faster. So this is the kind of theory that he's putting around, and this is what how Root and some others are going. Well, this kind of translates into the Protestant sort of Christian world and he did a bit of work on yesterday tracking. He referred to some other ones about between 1870 and 1970, your GDP it was just an incredible degree of economic growth. But when he talked about this, he said what's really interesting is that as that growth kind of stops, there's anxiety in the system to want to feed it more.
Yeah.
And he was saying that, that can be paralleled with the growth in the church. Nobody talked about growth in the 1950s. By the 1970s, the church growth movement starts. And so he said, there's this anxiety that actually we cannot sustain it. And it's so that the idea is sort of, the kind of this thesis is a very interesting thought, particularly when you get, I haven't given you much data, but he put a bit of data around that. And what sits in this is notion of I'm not sure I can explain this well, but where Root's going with this is the kind of instrumentalization of of getting that. It's so in other words, it's well, he threw two images up. One image was of a fertility god that was multi-breasted, and he sort of talked about that, in the ancient world, to keep the cult going and to have the rains, and then you just have to give more and more well, semen, more and more of that kind of activity to keep the cult going. And he said, and then he showed another image of one of Mary with the child, and one kind of the idea of one being kind of instrumental and the other one being more relational.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how did he unpack that? I'm not sure, but he was trying to draw those sort of that idea about the sense of I'm not explaining myself very well, but you know how we instrumentalize something to make
Yeah,
it
for
work for
sure.
us?
Like
Yeah,
if
so we
I
do that with human beings. So to get growth, you've got to do this. And actually, he talked about one church. This is interesting. He talked about one church that uh, they needed to grow, but the problem was that they couldn't get people out of the car park fast enough. So they raised tens of millions of dollars and managed to get on the council, the local borough, and to change the motorway so they get an off ramp.
Wow.
And the growth went up. But it was this sort of, so it's this sort of instrumentalized, because he sort of did some sums like members plus, well, I think I threw some of those out there. What was it?
Well, I think an analogy to the form versus the what was the instrumentality of it for churches would be like Jesus giving the Great Commission, where like the heart of it is a love for God and love for people, and it's deeply relational.
Yeah,
But the instrumentalization of it is to kind of fall in love with the methods that result in the end product of
mm,
what you're pursuing.
mm,
So I think that that might be a parallel where the pursuit of endless growth for the instrumentality of it can have some negative repercussions, but the pursuit of the relationality of it could potentially
yeah,
have more, it would be slower, it wouldn't be as effective, but it would have certainly a whole lot more, I guess, relational fruit and maybe stay more authentic and true to the spirit of what was commissioned in the first place. You know?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's, I mean, and I guess that idea of that kind of instrumentalizing is it runs on the causality of the sort of outcome.
Yeah.
Um, so he kind of threw this idea, um, uh, universities, and he said he took some lines of how universities advertise themselves, and it's sort of like knowledge plus more knowledge. Research plus more knowledge equals more research. Or in the kind of pastoral ministry church space, members plus programs means more members. Or another one was relevance plus more resources is more relevance. It's just on, so it's kind of very it's 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 not relational. It's about kind of function and instrumentalizing something.
Mm.
So he was really saying, well, this is kind of it's a big problem. It's and I guess in Rose's stuff is that there's an internal logic going on here about stabilizing things, in the system.
So
And so to stabilize the system, we need more growth
I
because
see
we're
what you mean.
yeah. Do you see what
Because
I'm saying?
I'll jump to you, Jonathan, in a second for your initial kind of
Yeah.
reactions. But where I see that most prevalent is in the election cycle of literally every single country. That's at least in the West, where the economy, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong because I just don't know. But the economy, if it's not growing, then it's not stable,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
the thought, right? And the only way to
yeah,
gain
Yeah.
stability is through growth and through positive GDP. But what's very clear is at some point in the next 100 years, we're going to come to a point where the population is not going to increase anymore, potentially, unless something really changes within the worldview of many people across the world. Um, and what that will result in is a lack of growth, actually negative GDP growth, because there's not as much people to consume things.
Yeah.
So clearly, then now, anyway. So I think I hear what you're saying, Graham, that principle, that idea can be
Mm.
seen everywhere.
Mm.
And so, Jonathan, what are your initial thoughts to what Graham's presented? Not, you don't have any critical
Yeah,
thoughts.
so
Like,
so
what's your
much
impression?
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I feel the tension too. And I wonder if the church has come to think of as growth equals depth. And I don't know if that equation adds up.
What do you mean by depth?
It's like people who are like the more, if we have more people in the seats, if our churches are bigger and broader and we're doing more stuff in the community, that equals the kingdom of God has come amongst us. And so the bigger that is, the more sprawling that is, the more prominent we are in the community, that the kingdom of God's come amongst us. That so growth equals depth in Christianity. And I don't know if that's true. You can have many people in the seats, yet
Mm.
none have a very thin understanding of what Christianity is, or a deep commitment and relationship with God.
Mm.
And so there's a falling away that is happening, it seems to me. And I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing. My inclination that it's okay. It's okay. And the reason I say that is because that suddenly raises up our anxiety that we're failing. It's all slipping away from us. And then suddenly we get guilty. And there's that Protestant guilt that lies beneath all this. When God comes back, man, we're in big trouble. We haven't done anything. And I think we need to address our guilt, and we need to address our anxiety around that guilt. Then I think we might be talking about something. So yeah, those would be my initial thoughts.
Those are some good initial thoughts. So,
Mm.
yeah, there's so many things, directions we can go with that, Graham. Like,
Yeah. I think,
yeah,
I don't know. Push back.
well,
Um,
uh,
I think there's an anxiety. You know what? I tell you what it looks like to people on the outside. It looks like the church needs them.
mm,
It makes it look like, gosh, man, guys, you got to come
yeah.
to church or we're going to die. We need you in our seats. So what can we do for you? What can we put on? How can we make it easier for you to come? Like, we're going to die. We're going to die. We need you.
So
The
which is that
church,
I.
the church is where life is. Like,
So what we've
the
done
posture
there,
should be, this is where you come to live.
yeah.
But at the moment, it's like, this is where you've got to come because we're going to die.
So we're turning people into instruments to get what we want.
Exactly. Because we
Yeah,
need them now.
yeah.
We need them now. So they're instrumental to our life. That is
Mm.
completely anathema to the gospel.
Yeah, I agree.
The gospel is that life is a gift anyway.
Mm.
We want to awaken people that the life is already here.
Mm.
That's what we need to be doing. So I think we've to be honest, I think the church has lost its understanding of the gospel and the vision of the gospel. And we've got incredibly scared. We've got incredibly anxious.
Mm.
And what comes with that is a whole lot of guilt that we're not doing enough.
So this
So we're
anxious, I mean,
becoming,
that's kind of where I went with why I thought that, it had some lot of resonance with what
yeah.
Root was sort of he was engaging with Hermit Rosa.
Mm,
Is kind of, so where's this anxiety coming from? Why
yeah.
the anxiety? And it's a quite an interesting thought to think that actually the anxiety comes because the system is unstable,
I think that's
and
right.
we're
Yeah.
looking for stability.
Yep.
And so to stabilize the system, we've got to we've got to get that church growing. We've got to get people in there. We've got to plant churches.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, all that's not wrong, but it's coming out of a much more it's the anxiety. And so then they're tempted then to find method or instruments in which to, in effect, keep the thing going.
Yeah.
because actually it's becoming unstable. It was a really interesting line that Root used, and I can't remember. Did I write it down? I thought it was if I can find it here. Hang on. I thought it was a really nice line about that. Oh, yes. Well, yeah, church invites us into relationship, not into institution. And what stabilizes it is Christ.
Yeah.
You know, where Root goes with that, and perhaps here's a story that may help that, which I found the story. I've got the book, and I found where he was referring to. It's in Eugene Peterson's own memoir. And so what he tells the story of Eugene Peterson going his Tuesdays, and he would go to this sort of place where he could get all the tools.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a woman in the church that I think she had some mental issues. He went up to the hospital, and he basically kind of rolled out all his tricks. And
Right.
he fell on his face,
Yeah.
and he realized that he had this messianic sort of syndrome.
Yeah.
You know, that really it wasn't about her. It was kind of all instruments to get her fixed. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
about a person.
Yeah.
And so then he left it for a month. Then he went and saw her, and then just sat there and listened to her. And at the end of it said, "What would you like? What could I do for you?"
Yeah.
And she said to him, "Teach me how to pray." I've been thinking about this a while, and yes, there is something you can do for me. Teach me how to pray.
That's so interesting because that's what the disciples asked Jesus, and he gave them the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
That's
just
really
so that kind of that I think when you say it could sound a bit cliche. What stabilizes is Christ, and then here's the point. He seems unstable.
yeah.
That's what Root says. I thought, oh, it's deeply paradoxical.
Yeah.
I walk into the hospital and I have nothing in my hand. I
Yeah.
can't do anything,
Mm-hmm.
but I can be with the person, and I can be, and also with the assurance that Christ is present in this encounter of relationship.
Yeah, that's right. And that's
So
what
there is,
yeah.
and that's where I think he's going. That's where the resonance. That's what Hermont Rose is talking about. He's talking about the resonance, our relationship to the world. So
Yep.
he's there.
I think that's right. I think that's really good. I mean, we often hear about the unanxious presence. I want to be an
Mm,
unanxious presence.
mm, mm,
And we apply that to the person. I want to be an unanxious person. But
mm,
I think in many kind of ways, I wonder if we need to apply that to the church at this current
mm.
time.
Yeah,
The church is
that's a good
deeply
thought.
anxious, and
Mm,
the witness of the church in this age would be to be an unanxious church.
mm,
So we shrink. It's
mm,
okay. It can't kill our life. We don't have to hold on to anything here. We don't have to make anything happen here. But as Christians, as Protestant Christians, often we feel guilty that we're not making the church happen. We don't have to make it happen.
mm.
We have a life that is unending,
It's
and
a
that's what
paradigm,
that's
but
what Jesus came to
it's a
save us
paradigm. There's a
from.
paradigm shift in there, though, isn't there? There is a way of seeing this.
100%. The machine's not going to run out of fuel, guys. You know what I mean?
Mm,
The church always has life, and we do not need to be anxious about it.
mm,
And I wonder if that's part of it too.
mm.
Yeah, I don't know.
Now, it's an interesting thought about. I mean, anxious presence is not an uncommon sort of,
No, you
it's
hear
a
it all the
familiar
time.
term for me, but I
Yeah,
hadn't really thought of it quite so corporately as you put it.
yeah, exactly. Especially if you saw the church, if you think of the church as the body of Christ in the world, walking through this world,
Mm,
the witness of being unanxious in our cultures, in our communities, would just be so powerful.
it would, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And that takes detachment. It takes a
Mm,
really healthy detachment from
mm,
the world. I think we are so attached to the world that in many kind of ways we've become so similar. We've taken on the world's concerns of
But
growth,
the funny part
of
about
getting
here, though,
bigger, and we don't need to.
Jonathan, is that there's an irony here
Yeah.
because, in one sense, we've become so attached to the world, but we're so detached.
That too.
Not
Yeah.
actually present to the world. We're
Yeah.
present to an idea, you know,
Hmm.
of some sort of outcome,
Yep.
of some sort of you know, yeah, to some perceived reality, rather than feeling undone and but meeting Christ in the midst of the moment
Yeah.
with the other.
Yep.
I mean, that sounds very ministry oriented, and I that really appeals to me because I feel like, you know, I've had those experiences of going to hospital and greeting a parent that's lost a child, and you honestly you go, I've got nothing to say,
Yeah.
and in that moment of not being able to say something and say, well, can you pray with us? And you go, gosh, I hope my prayer is good.
Yeah.
But the prayer is,
100%.
thank you, Jesus, that you're here. Because I
Yeah.
have nothing in my hand.
Yeah.
And for the other person, he's there.
Yeah.
So so yeah, I mean that's the kind of relationality that's sitting in there, but there's mystery in there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I don't know, what does it take us to get there? And I think that's where when I was hearing Root, it made sense to me to see that this kind of inner logic of stabilization, to name that kind of, for me, it's kind of helpful. I'm going, because as people are not seeing this kind of milieu, is that the word, around us, the habitus of our environment, that's kind of making us anxious. So because we just get on the treadmill and we've got to do more,
Yeah.
and that's how I've, you know, I mean, that's kind of a little bit of how I've felt over the last year. Like, how much
Hmm.
more do we have to do?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you reckon, Joey?
I'm not, I've been thinking while you have been talking, so I'm not quite sure if I'm caught up entirely with where you guys ended up here, because I'm still dwelling on a few of the beginning points. Um, I don't think, I don't think growth is like the problem. I think the
Yeah.
pursuit of endless growth is the problem.
Hmm. Okay.
Like, you know what I mean? I don't think in the same way like Jesus said the love of money is the root of all evil.
Yeah.
It's
Mm,
like it's not money that's evil, it's the love of money that's
Hmm.
evil. And so I think it's kind of similar to this too, because I think someone who is, let's just hypothetical lies, or let's just see how this goes, but um somebody who's like fully integrated into Christ, where there's no fear and there's only love that's coming
Hmm.
out of this person. When they receive the commands of Christ and what it means to obey him in every regard in their life, there will be like you would anticipate that there will be desire for more people to come to know Jesus through this person, right?
Yeah.
You would
Yeah.
anticipate that. So it's not the growth that's the problem, but I think the growth as a perpetual pursuit or endless pursuit, or the end goal is a fear response
Yeah.
from something
mm,
Yeah.
that may have been initially good. So like, so for example, I'll use my own experience as an example, and maybe I'll stop talking from there. I like the idea of making a lot of money and being very entrepreneurial and and pursuing that. I like the idea of that. But every time I try and motivate myself to even put myself in that frame of mind of doing it, I really can't do it.
Hmm.
Not because I don't think I have like this wrong skill set or whatever to be able to put, you know, put effort into something to see money as a result. It's because I actually I don't have anything to prove in that regard. I don't have a fear response that's kind of motivating me to find a level of like security, identity, and more money than I need to live.
Yeah.
And and I don't, you know, you hear classic stories. This is not everybody's experience for sure, or everyone who is an entrepreneur at all. But you hear classic stories of like, oh, I had a bad relationship with a family member growing up, and I've always wanted to prove them wrong. And then so I just try to make
Hmm.
myself as successful as possible, you know? Where like that is actually wrong because you're trying to you're pursuing something that is that's a symptom of something that's deeper going on. So Jonathan, when you mentioned, I think that the church has a fear response to and an anxiety to what's going on and shrinking, and
Yeah.
where the posture for the past 30, 40, 50 years has been, oh, we need you, world. Come to us. We need you, or else we're going to
Yeah.
die.
Yeah.
That's the fear response that's then creating the cycle of perpetual, endless growth pursuit.
Yeah.
And then we
That's right.
see endless models and church philosophies or ministry philosophies kind of pour out of that.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas to say, if the opposite is true, is the response where it's the church's response is we have life, come and see.
Yeah.
I think the result will still be growth, but the posture is entirely different.
I think that's exactly right.
I think the
Yeah.
results are the same, but there's a toxicity in one compared to the other, ecclesiologically speaking.
That's a great call.
Which, a
Yeah.
phrase that may be helpful there is growth in something, or is it growth in someone?
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I was thinking as well. That's right.
So
So
the
what are
one
we
is, yeah,
perpetuating?
yeah, one is an
Yeah.
object, and is an object of an ideal,
That's
well,
right.
an idol, you could say.
That's
So
right.
you could say, Joey, growth is an it becomes the idol.
Yeah.
Yep. And do you know what? The world doesn't need more church programs. It can get that somewhere else. And
Yeah.
so we shrink because we're not offering anything that is different than what the world already has. The world already has it. We don't need to model it back to the world. What's the point? That people don't need to come to us for that reason. What the world doesn't have is life.
Mm,
It just doesn't have it. It deals in death.
mm,
It deals in ways of death. And the church is supposed to deal in ways of life. And it's the one thing that the world doesn't have. And it's the one thing that is so attractive about us.
mm.
And that's what will draw people back. And I wonder if we're in a time of stripping back to the essentials. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And let's change the metaphor of what we're actually doing here. Come back to that garden metaphor where we go through seasons of flourishing, seasons that where the ground needs to be fallow again, and then it needs to be turned over again for new life to come through. I think that's a more human way. It's a more natural way of thinking about what's going on in the church. Life doesn't disappear in those times. Life is always
So,
there.
I
It's
mean, in our
okay. It's okay for it to
yeah,
be fallow for a while.
yeah,
Life is still in the ground. We don't need to worry. The next season will come.
mm,
We don't need to force it.
mm.
We just need to be ready for it. So yeah.
It's true. Well, like in Canada, you see it more clearly the
Yeah,
seasons,
more
to be
clearly.
honest.
Yeah, that's right.
Like
Those
when
seasons.
when winter is fully established in Canada,
Yeah,
it is everyone's just like, holy crap, we just want this
that's
to end.
right.
But nobody is like, spring is not going to come this year.
Exactly.
Everybody is like, we know spring's coming. I would just like it to come sooner rather than later, if that's okay.
That's right.
That's the thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
But
you're right around
yeah,
our biblical hope.
but we're in a time where we don't like waiting for the seasons. So what we do is we force it and we engineer things to happen all
Yeah.
the time. And that's where you come back to the resources. We've thought of the church as a resource, and then suddenly we've thought of the people as a resource. And if they're not
Mm,
producing something all the time,
mm.
we get anxious again and we get guilty again. But that's because we're in this technological kind of mindset. There's no time to reflect. There's no time to just sit around. There's no
Because
time for
because it's
the
frenetic.
fluctuation.
It's
That's
it's
right.
accelerating.
You
Everything's
got to be on
accelerating.
all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
We've got
Um,
this kind of the mindset's wrong, and if it's not working, we'll figure out a way to make it work.
yeah. So so it's forced.
Yeah, it's really
It's
forced,
yeah,
right?
and so that forced is so the other words that don't sit around this is delight and joy and
hundred
sort of
percent.
a kind of how would you the joy is a sort of it's almost wasteful
It's a
and
wasteful. That's
extravagance
exactly
and
right.
yeah, and so it's
Yeah,
it's not there's no delight there. It's this
it's spreadsheets, and there's no
yeah,
poetry. There's no art.
no,
It's
that's
just
right. Yeah,
spreadsheets, and it's about making everything work on time, efficiency.
Yeah.
That person's not efficient. We don't, we've got to get rid of them. But
Mm.
that's not how a garden works.
No.
And so what else also happens, and I think this has happened in the church too, that because we're so keen on efficiency, that the outlier, the one that could bring new life into a situation, because they're kind of messy, they have different ideas, that doesn't work with our efficiency.
No.
We've got to produce. So we never hear the word of the Spirit come in. We
Because when you,
close ourselves off. We
yeah.
know how the Spirit works now. So we don't listen to the outlier. We don't listen to the people on the margins. We don't listen to the prophets because we've got it. We just need to be efficient. I think that's death, man.
Yeah, and and I wonder whether that sort of almost, what's the word? Besotted is not the right word, but just infused with this need to be efficient
Yes,
is the way in which we're seeing the world or measuring what's of value.
that's right.
Which
Yeah,
is kind of outcome, like
which is
to get
outcome
here, to
again.
get there. So it's a very linear way, and I guess what I'm referring to is efficient causality.
That's
That's the
right.
causality that's sitting in the mix, and we just keep defaulting back to it.
We do.
Um, we can't.
We do.
It seems that it's difficult to step out of that.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a word here for the church, and it is, when Jesus himself says, come to me, all you who are burnt out on religion.
Mm,
And I think the church is burnt out on religion
mm,
and it needs to somehow come back and here to sit with Jesus for a while. So I don't see this falling away. I don't see this dissipating
mm.
as death at all. I feel like it's a good pruning for life. That's
Yeah.
probably very countercultural to what most people would want to
Well,
hear.
I mean, it has. Sorry, go
Yeah,
for it, Tom.
Joey. Yeah, then
Well,
jump in,
I've got
Joey.
one thought, and I don't want to name names at all, so I won't. So there's a deep sense in at the moment within a lot of churches in the circles that we run, and this isn't just locally, this is like globally around different Protestant Western churches, all right?
Yeah,
Where, all right, the past 4 years or the past 30 or 40 years have seen a lot of decline. COVID's just accelerated that. But
yeah,
man, we like God's going to do something really soon to change it around.
yeah, yeah,
And it might
yeah,
not be soon, it might be in the next 30, 40 years, but don't worry, we'll get back to where we were.
yeah.
Is so like
And
on the
and all the
surface, I'm
all the
like, that's
celebrities turning back to Christianity and stuff. They're like, see,
yeah, yeah. I'm
see, it's happening.
a part of me is
Yeah.
like, I'm not opposed to I'm not opposed to God doing
Mm.
whatever the heck he wants, right? That's not
Ah,
what I'm saying. I think he
yeah,
should do whatever he wants to do and using imperfect people and methods and models to accomplish whatever he wants.
definitely.
That's
Yep.
the whole biblical story essentially, is him doing what he wants through people who really suck a lot of the
Yep.
time. And to
Yep.
be honest, and except when Jesus comes, then it's a very different story. However, um what I hear is what I hear when I maybe not from the prominent speakers, but at least the impression I'm getting from people who are listening to this kind of hope and expectation and prayers for renewal and revival is we want to get back to the way things were where we were growing again, or
Mm.
when
Right.
culture took notice of us, or
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
we had influence again,
Yeah.
or when society was more Christian and better. And I'm not saying that those are like the results of that are bad things, but I I'm hard pressed. Like when I hear these conversations, in the back of my head is like, I have a funny feeling that God's going to do something that none of us have expected and none of us have seen before, really. And the reason why I say that, as a biblical theologian, when I look through the story of the Bible, I see the end of the Old Testament and I see that the return from exile of Judah coming back from exile, the Israelite people. And for 400 years, they're back in their promised land, and they're developing a whole set of expectations around what will look like for the Messiah to come. And they have pre-rabbinic literature, the
Mm.
Apocrypha, Pseudepigrapha, all writings about this. And they have a really well set out plan of what will it look like when God comes back as a result. And then Jesus shows up and none of them were right. The only thing they were right about was a resurrection is going to come where everyone's going to be resurrected, but nobody thought that Jesus is going to be the first resurrection. And our resurrection's later. They all thought it was going to happen all at the same time. Then 2,000 years later, we're still here right now, waiting for our resurrection. So when I see that, I'm like, you know what, guys? I don't think it's going to look like a post Reformation period of time or a post Great Revivals of the 1700s or 1800s. We live in a secular period, in a secular time where I feel like God's going to do something very different. And I think he knows that we're not actually ready for it. And that's where I'm coupling it with what you said, Jonathan, of I think there's a lot of just sitting and kind of letting the spirit kind of do a deep work, which I think will take decades and a couple generations to really kind of see played out.
Maybe.
But I don't know. That's my only hesitation is the groups of people who are like, we're gonna get back to where we were. And I'm like, where were we? I'm like, what do you think God's gonna do in the future? What he did in the past?
Where were we? Yeah.
Well, you remind me of
Yeah.
of a line that sounds very familiar. I'll just change a little bit. Let's make the church great again.
Right.
Well, it's not too like I know. Okay, ready for controversial email or angry emails coming in after Graeme said that, I'm sure. But
Well,
it's not that different. Like that's
no, that's my point. That's
yeah.
my point.
That's every Western story of progress. Let's make things either better than they ever have been or as good as they used to be.
It's so interesting.
It is the myth of what it
Yeah.
used to be. I mean, that's again, it's a myth in the sense that were you living back then?
Yeah, it's
So
true.
Yeah,
so
that's
we
right.
what we've done is we've created something that we've looked back and we thought that was the moment, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and we've taken from that. We've not seen the other bits of that period either.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a, I mean, because I keep asking underneath this kind of like, I always like to know why, you know, why the anxiety, what's bubbling here that's causing this. And I mean, this doesn't answer that, but I've often thought we're quite Pelagian in our culture. There's a strong drive to, you know, human will, we can do this. And the trouble with that is we don't meet Christ in the midst of it.
Yeah.
It's a sort of, we've talked about this with worship, you know, like worship's two angles. It's the object and the subject, you know, the splendor and glory of God, and our response is delight and joy. And it's the meeting of those 2 points that create that sense of participation. But if it's all us, it's and that's sometimes how it feels.
Yeah, I think that's
I'm
right.
intuiting that rather than being sort of very cerebral and cognitive and having an answer. It's something that and that's why I like the word resonance, because it's a vibration that is a dissonance.
Yeah. So funny. I hope this is not off topic, but I had a 2-hour conversation last week with a Muslim. And it was really good. Like, we had such a great conversation, so much in common. But we started off it's like he asked me, you know, what's life about?
Good question.
And
Ask Jonathan.
yeah, man, I was like, wow, that's a good question. And I said, you know, I think for the Christian, we would have to say that the world was created out of nothing for love. The whole world is created in love from a loving God, a personal God. We don't have to worry. We don't have to be anxious about that. Life has been given to us. It's gifted to us. And God is committed to this world, committed to us, no matter what happens. And I said, turn the question back. I said, what do you think life's about? And he says, it's a test. We're here being tested. And hopefully we'll pass the test and go to heaven. And as we've been talking, I just think that's a lot of the Christian worldview at the moment as well. We've forgotten about being.
Yeah.
We've forgotten that we've been given life, and that's it, man. God is committed to keeping us alive. That's why he came and
And
died
and
for
if we
us.
forget that, Jonathan, we don't see that the moment or the perpetual or the present we're living in as a gift to us.
As a gift.
We
And
see it as an
yeah,
object to be manipulated and instrumentalized to get what we need to get that we think might be the satisfying.
pleasing
Yeah,
to God and
yeah,
satisfying to God, and
yeah,
hopefully will hold
yeah,
back the wrath of God. And
yeah, yeah,
we're being tested, we're given a great commission, we better freaking not mess it up.
yeah.
We're not messing it up. We're only messing it up if we forget to witness to the life itself that is we don't need to be anxious for.
I
Stop being
mean,
anxious.
those
You know,
words that we, those words that God loves us are so profound.
exactly. And this is why the church calls us back. This is where life is.
Mm,
Here you are accepted and loved, no matter what your qualifications, no matter what you've done and haven't done in life.
mm.
Here you are loved because we have a God of love. And that's so different, mate,
I
to what
know.
the Muslim guy gave me.
What did he say? Was he?
Here you were tested,
Yeah.
and you better freaking
Did he
pass this
find that?
test,
Did
otherwise
he?
you'll lose.
Did he find that? I don't think disturbing, but strangely mysterious.
Yeah,
Curious.
I don't know how we found it. We just left that in silence. I just let it sit.
That's
Yeah, you're
beautiful.
on.
Maybe he just thought you're silly. Like, oh my gosh, this guy knows nothing.
Yeah, exactly right. And you know what? In many kind of ways, I hoped he did, because Christianity isn't something that you can use.
No.
It doesn't do anything, but it's the most life-giving thing that you'll find. So
Yeah.
I'm happy for it to sit there like a seed,
Mm.
and let it, one plants and one waters and one reaps. That's
To me,
fine.
Jonathan. That's I guess to me that's evangelism.
I think so
Yeah,
too.
I mean, I don't even
Yeah.
like using the word because it then becomes very objective and instrumentalized, but
Yeah,
actually, that's it,
that's right. Yeah.
and you embodied that in the space.
Yeah. And the reason I could do that though, and I come back to, is because I was not anxious.
Mm,
I didn't need this guy. I didn't need him to come, but
mm,
I was happy to welcome him in.
mm.
He can either want it or don't want it. That's not up to me. That's
But
up to God.
I mean, interesting. I think you how. So here's my question to you: how did you see that person?
Oh, I mean, it was an amazing moment where I saw
So is
a
he?
huge
He's
love for
is
him.
Yeah. So he's a gift to you at that moment.
Absolute gift.
Changes that.
Exactly.
Does that change? I mean, I guess I'm reasoning that out by saying that changes the posture.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think
It,
that's
it's
right.
like, oh, this is a gift from God here at this moment.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
that's a
wasn't an
good point.
obstacle,
No,
He wasn't an obstacle. He wasn't someone I needed.
not a challenge.
No, I didn't need to rack him up on anything.
No.
Not a challenge, because there's nothing to protect. I've got nothing to protect. Not even Christianity. I don't need to protect
no,
it.
you don't.
It's
No,
not my it's not my job. I've been given a gift. And I don't know how to scale that up to the church wide level.
I know. I feel
But
like we need a part two conversation because I'm
yeah,
like,
I
well,
don't I
then
don't know the answer to that.
I know
Yeah.
this is where the deep thinking comes in because I'm like, man, what we've just laid out, and I'm sure I'm going to disagree with some of the stuff we've said if I reflect
Yeah.
on it for the next week.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
so if you're listening, we don't immediately agree with everything we say. It just takes time to think about it. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're just processing out loud. But if let's just say everything we said is maybe a bit more Jesus gospel oriented than not, then what does that actually mean for how a local congregation or church
Yeah.
functions and
I don't
sees
know.
itself in the community and in the world?
Yeah.
If growth isn't the goal, but is certainly welcome as it comes, or if it's not the pursuit, then what is? Or if,
Yeah.
balancing the books, or if being a church that pushes back the culture in a prophetic way, I because even me saying that, as I'm saying that out loud, I'm just like, Joey, you're wrong. But because I'm like, well, no, I want Christianity to be significant. I want it to be important. I want people to see its relevance. I want people to know who Jesus is. But I
Yeah.
feel like if my motivations are kind of mixed and manipulated in the pursuit of that, then I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm even wrestling with this as I'm saying it out loud.
Yeah. That's
But
good.
when we ask these questions about the church, then I'm scratching my head. But then I kind of think, well, one landing place, and I'm not young anymore to go pastoring again. But I think I'd do this so differently.
Yeah.
I just wished I knew, not knew, but in my being was a lot younger. And I wonder, I guess what I'm saying there is I wonder it's a pastor posture is a really important, that this, as a pastor, this becomes really important for the church because you're not going to change anything without the pastoral kind of, what does that pastor person look like?
Mm. Mm.
Can I
Which brings me back to the
Yeah.
story of
That's a
Eugene
good.
Peterson,
It's a good
which brings
question.
me back
Yeah.
to that
Good question.
story of him again going, you know, um, yeah,
can, can I just kind of end on a personal note?
Yeah.
yeah,
So, as a bit of an analogy,
Yeah.
so I have a project that I'm starting, and I won't officially announce it yet. And there's a potential to fail. That's always there, right?
Yeah.
And Jonathan, you went through this, and Graham as
Yeah.
well. And
Yeah.
there's always the potential to fail, and allowing that anxiety to kind of to be overwhelming. And the only remedy to that fear of failure for me, and maybe you guys can relate, is to actually be okay with failure. I feel like it's actually being okay with failing actually frees me from fearing failing.
Yeah. That's great.
Um,
Yeah.
Not because I'm sufficient within myself, but because I find my true sufficiency and identity in Christ and the journey he's bringing me on,
Yep.
you
yeah,
know? And so I don't know
Yeah.
how that relates
Right.
because I kind of forget how the analogy works, but you know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
I think it relates to our conversation a little bit. It's like when it comes to the church's two postures of we need you or we'll die versus we have life, come and see. I'm like, well, I'm if I was a better integrated pastor, which I'm not, or church leader, which I'm not, then I would hope that my posture would be similar to that project, which is like, yeah, I can fail at this. The church can shrink. Things can get numerically and quantifiably worse.
Yeah.
Am I okay with that? I think I need to become okay with that, or else that's going to be the toxic fear that actually drives a lot of my motivations.
Yeah.
mm,
And
mm,
then I
That's
will be
right.
pursuing the right things in the wrong way or for
Yeah.
the wrong reasons.
Yep. Yes.
yeah. Mm.
I
There's
think
more
that's
like
right,
to add
man.
to that. There's a bit, because I was sort of thinking too, is that in the moment as you go, it's actually meeting Christ in the process.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I don't know if I thought of failure quite so the way much you was thinking about it, but those thoughts and fears did come to you at different moments. But there was a sort of, you know, I don't know about tomorrow. I have no idea. But at the moment, Christ is with me in this,
Mm-hmm.
and I can live with that at the moment, and that's enough.
Yeah.
So it's rather a little bit more pointing to sort of how would you put it, a sense of connection with the I don't know, I found really cliche when I start saying this, but with the presence of God, with the sense that Jesus is in this, in the experience of who I'm connecting with. It's the idea, Jonathan, of the gift that's been
Yep.
given to me at this moment
Yeah.
is from God. And I
Mm-hmm.
should and this is to be I can live in that.
Yep. Absolutely.
But you're right, Joey, how much have I thought about failure? Because failure scares the heck out of me.
Heck yeah.
If you
It
really
does.
scratch the surfaces, where we feel, I think it's where human beings behave really badly is when they become insecure. I've watched it over the years.
100%.
And I know myself that when I'm insecure, man, I falter and I you know, so all sorts of unwanted feelings and doubts and kind of negativity about, oh, maybe I'm not that, this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
And you'll know yourself because you tell your wife that, as I tell mine,
Yeah.
have my doubts. Because it's the person closest to you, you tell.
I think that's right. I think that's really good. And then if we bring that back to the church, is the church afraid at the moment? Are we afraid of failure? And that's what's driving many of our decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I see churches doing things, I see institutions doing things, and to me it looks like it's out of a fear of failure, and it's out of a whole lot of anxiety, and they're definitely not a non-anxious presence. So it's worth asking ourselves that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. All the birds and the plants and whatnot, they're
I
taken care
know.
of. Just
Yeah.
seek my kingdom first, and all these things will be given to you.
Yeah.
I
And
love that
what are
passage.
all
I
these
accept it.
things? What are all these things? Well, the blessings of the kingdom through the Sermon on the Mount.
Yep.
Mhm.
You're given Jesus for pursuing his kingdom first, pursuing him.
Yeah.